Broadcasting from the lobby of the NYU Langone Medical Center, ranked #1 in patient safety and quality among the top medical centers. This is Doctor Radio.
We have an email from Don who writes, I am concerned about the, quote, openness of seniors being sexual mainly because of predators wanting to take advantage of older people's loneliness. Do you find that more elder abuse is happening because of this opening of sexual relations? It's a really great question, Don. Thank you.
It is a great question, Don. And the interface between sexuality and elder abuse is a very, very difficult one. And let me just kind of just digress for one moment to talk about the Hebrew home being in the forefront of the battle against elder abuse. 10 years ago this month, the Hebrew home opened up the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Center for Elder Abuse Prevention. This was the first emergency shelter for victims of elder abuse in the United States.
And Dan, I have to let our listeners know, because I remember doing a story about it, and at the time, and it really wasn't that long ago, but 10 years ago, it was groundbreaking. Yeah. And this concept that you would need a shelter for the victims of elder abuse was really kind of out there at the time.
It still is, and I'll come back to Don's question in a moment because it's a good one. But just to follow up, you were actually the first journalist, Perry, to do a story on the shelter when you were at NBC, and it really opened the doors to people. But 10 years later, we're still dealing with an epidemic of elder abuse in this country. And just to give it a context,
and it's only going to get worse. Is that right?
It's getting worse every day. And just to give it a context, 30, 40 years ago, nobody really had the same recognition of child abuse as we do today. Today, if a child appears with a bruise, there are people who are required by law to report even a suspicion of child abuse.
And if you don't, you're in trouble.
You're in trouble, and we've created an entire foster care system to deal with it. 40 years ago, most people did not recognize the magnitude of domestic violence. And, in those days, the police officer would be called to a domestic violence incident, and they would walk the man around the block and tell him to take it easy. Today, we know that is the single most dangerous call that a police officer can make, is to walk into a domestic violence situation. That's right. And so, and similarly with both children and women, the fact is that if a child is not visible to us as a society, doesn't come to school, if a woman doesn't appear at work for a few days, people are suspicious, people get nervous, and people reach out. The difference with older adults is that older adults in our society are segregated and isolated by definition. And so we will never know whether a victim is being abused because they're stuck at home. And secondly, the perpetrator wants to keep them isolated because that's a good way to keep the money coming in and to keep them under their own coercion and control. And so the shelter became necessary because there was nowhere for elder victims to go. And because a place like the Hebrew Home specializes in geriatric care, and other nonprofit facilities around the country, we specialize in this care. We're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Our staff knows exactly what to look for. We didn't have to build any new facilities. And also because men are victims of abuse as well as women, the domestic violence shelter system didn't do the job. And so we've created the first shelter, and we've assisted 12 other long-term care facilities around the country in replicating the model. And we've actually created a consortium called the Spring Alliance, Shelter Partners, Regional, National, and Global. And I really want to just compliment the team, the Weinberg team at the Hebrew Home, who are comprised of lawyers and social workers that are working tirelessly to bring public awareness and intervention in cases of elder abuse. But to come back to Don's question.
And let's just remind our listeners what Don's question is. He writes, I'm concerned about the openness of seniors being sexual mainly because of predators wanting to take advantage of older people's loneliness. Do you find that more elder abuse is happening because of this opening of sexual relations?
The answer is yes, and not just because of the opening of sexual relations, but because of the opening of the internet, because of the predator impact on older adults. Older adults are the single easiest group of people to become victimized by predators. And this is not only in terms of sexuality, but also in terms of economic crimes. So on the sexuality front, it would be very easy for an older man to become enamored of a younger woman. We've heard about these stories. There's lots of, I guess what they call December, July relationships, and the young woman moves in and begins stealing. It may lead to physical abuse. The next thing you know, the will is changed, and an entire life is changed because of the predator behavior. Conversely, an older woman can become charmed by a younger. It doesn't even have to be a younger man. It can just be another man who moves in on her. She's lonely, and the next thing you know, he's stealing, he's robbing, he's taking control of her life. This is also a concern, and in some ways a bigger concern, in the LGBT population, because in that population, you don't have children necessarily. You don't have a spouse. And we're seeing a lot of cases, and we're working very closely with a wonderful organization in New York City called SAGE to develop programs and services to respond to this population. But there you've got more isolation because the LGBT population doesn't necessarily have the family involvement that a straight individual may have.